In the depths of the Eye of Terror, the malevolent forces of chaos continue with their eternal quest to rid the galaxy of those loyal to the Emperor of Mankind. Under the ruthless gaze of Abaddon the Despoiler, the traitor legions never tire in their eternal search for more elaborate means of destruction and slaughter. Rumours speak of an experimental new take on the infernal device known as the Noctilith Crown, although the true purpose of these chaotic machines remains unknown to Imperial authorities, as our initial server skull footage was deemed inconclusive, bringing only snippets of heretical forces and mysterious machinery. So far it seems that all hope is lost for those loyal to the defenders of humanity, as the Imperial task force sent to investigate was never even assembled. This is Heretic from Warzone Games, and today I'll show you how to make your very own miniature Noctilith Crown objective marker. Made from a few spare parts in my bits box, a little green stuff and a square or two of plasticard, this objective marker is reasonably simple but undeniably effective. Join me as I piece this conversion together on camera whilst trying to make it look like it was fully planned out from the beginning. I initially had the idea for this conversion after seeing this particular piece on the Chaos War Shrine from the Age of Sigmar range and noticing its similarities to the Noctilith Crown from 40k. Although the reason why I ended up with this piece was that it was just going spare after buying the parts for the Chaos Icon Bearer video that I did last. I had realised that I had spent far too much on the bulk bits auction, and I felt like I had to get my money's worth out of the parts I had left over. For the rest of the pieces, I just raided my bits box for whatever parts seemed to fit together at the time, as well as a few custom cables to tie it all together. This includes some fairly old pieces of plastic, such as the lamps from Games Workshop's first attempt at multi-part plastic terrain, the Cities of Death range. By mashing together a selection of parts and a little green stuff, I've created a fairly convincing and unique Chaos objective marker. Though as satisfied as I am with the final result of this conversion, I'm sad to say that as much as it looks like it should, the attached handle does not actually turn around. I came up with the idea of this conversion when trying to plan a narrative battle and realising that the only official objective markers that you could currently buy were for the Indomitus campaign. This works fine for Loyalists versus Necrons or some other Indomitus related scuffle, but if I wanted to fight a skirmish, say between two rival Chaos warbands in the Warp, then it doesn't necessarily make sense to be fighting over a Necron ruin or some Mechanicum tech. You could use an empty base, but then why bring together two fully painted armies on a custom battlefield to fight over a blank circle? So here's my take on a custom Chaos objective marker. If you like this, I'll continue the series for other sides in Warhammer 40,000. Here you can see the small collection of parts I've gathered together to make the basic structure of the mini Noctilith Crown. I'll focus on details like the control panel and cables later on. I'm going to focus on the parts that make up the bulk of the machinery, the backpacks. Here you can see what they'll look like after they've been assembled and pinned on. To achieve this, I combined together the two backpack pieces of the Last Cannon and Autocannon backpacks from the Chaos Havoc kit. To get these to fit flush to the main ring section of the Noctilith Crown, I'll have to do a bit of a bodge, as when you turn it to the side, you can notice the comparatively large gap between the backpack and the ring. No problem, I can easily remedy this with a strip of plasticard and a small amount of green stuff. I'm using a strip of 1mm thick plasticard for this fix. You can easily find this on most online hobby stores or on sites such as eBay. To get the plasticard to the correct size, I place the plasticard strip over the back of the backpack to roughly measure it out. Using my trusty purple marker, I mark the plasticard at the point where I want it cut, which is just before where it reaches the edge. I then snip the plasticard at the marked location, making sure to hold it firmly so it doesn't fly off. With my file, I rough up the surface of the backpack where I'll be attaching the plasticard. With the backpack prepped, it's time to break out the green stuff. I tear off what I estimate as being the correct amount of green stuff to fill in the gap in the backpack. It is important to properly mix up green stuff to an even consistency. The best method of doing this is to first rip and tear the two parts of the epoxy putty into approximately the correct amount and then roll them together into a ball. Once this is done, I use a combination of folding, stretching and twisting the green stuff to efficiently mix the two colours together. I then repeat these steps over again until it is an even green colour throughout. With the green stuff properly mixed, I roll it back into a ball and simply push it into the hole on the back of the backpack. I then use my clay shaper to push the green stuff into the gap, squishing it against all the edges and making sure there are no air pockets. With the green stuff pressed into place, I notice there's actually a little too much here. The simple solution is to use a cocktail stick and scoop out any surplus amount. After removing the excess, I flatten out the green stuff on the rear of the backpack with my clay shaper. I find the clay shaper to be the best tool for the job, as its soft texture means that it doesn't cut through the green stuff, but instead squishes it into place. Now that this section of green stuff is finished with, before it dries, I add the plasticard rectangle from earlier. All I need to do is simply push the rectangle into the green stuff and wait for it to dry. Although I take my time making sure it is aligned properly and is good and centered. Placing it back on the ring again, it seems like our wedge is doing its job, but there is another element that is stopping it from lying perfectly flat. After some investigation, this spike appears to be what's stopping the piece from sitting completely flat. This problem is easily sorted with a simple bit of whittling with a scalpel. I start to cut away a small groove on the top of the backpack so that it fits around the spike. I whittle away the backpack at a slow pace, trying my best to keep it even as I go. I carefully repeat this process until the groove is the correct width to fit into place. It is usually advisable to cut away from your fingers, not towards them. But luckily, I've not sliced off any parts of my hand as of yet. Placing it back over the spike, I can see that the backpack fits far more snugly to the surface than it used to. Now that it's completely dried, I carefully use my scalpel to remove the plasticard from the green stuff. I place a small amount of Gorilla Glue in the indent where the plasticard once sat. I then place the plasticard back in the indent, on top of the glue. Next, I mark out the centre of the plasticard with a scalpel, ready for drilling. I place my pin vise into the marked location and drill out a suitably sized hole for my pinning material to fit into later. Now to figure out which pinning material is most appropriate. The 0.5mm silver spool of wire on the left or the sturdier 0.5mm brass wire on the right. I decided to go for the thicker brass wire, applying some glue on the end of the pin and placing it firmly into the drill hole. With the pin now glued in place, I need to drill out a hole in the main ring section so I can attach the backpack. I do this using the same methods as before. First, using my scalpel to mark the location where I need the pin vise to drill into. This makes it easier to get the drill hole straight. And then placing the pin vise into the marked location and drilling a hole into the ring. Note that I am not drilling all the way through to the other side, and into my finger. At this point I notice that I have managed to bend the lower spike out of shape whilst I was drilling. No problem. I simply bend it back into place and no one's the wiser. As you can see, the wire is far too long to fit into the hole I just drilled. To remedy this, I need to snip the wire to the correct length. After trimming the wire down slightly, I slot it into the hole to see how well it fits. As you can see, it still needs some adjusting yet. I bring out my wire snippers and trim off more of the pin, making sure not to cut it too short. I place the pin back into the hole and push it into place. It seems that it's now a correct fit to the ring section. So with the pin sorted, I need to do a few more steps to finalize the backpacks before I can glue them into place. With my plastic snips, I snip off any unnecessary parts from the two backpacks, starting with the cables sticking out of the side of the first. That seems to be all that's needed for this part, so now I'll move on to the second backpack, where there's a fair amount of snipping to do. I'm going to start off with the vents. I roughly cut off the one vent attached on the left hand side, then trim down the remaining plastic as much as I can with the snips. Picking up my scalpel again, I remove the final piece of plastic. Next, I move on to these protruding plastic semicircles on the rear of the backpack. After snipping these off with the plastic snips, I use my scalpel to whittle away the excess. And finally, I cut away the two cables at the bottom of the backpack. Moving back to the first backpack, I notice the two plastic circles on either side of the lower part. I first attempt to use the scalpel to remove these structures, but I realise that it would be far more simple and neater to use the plastic snips for this task instead. I repeat this on the other side of the backpack. I just get the circle in between the teeth of the snips, and it will create a surprisingly flat surface. Now that there are no other unwanted pieces sticking out of either of the backpacks, I'm one step closer to gluing them both together. But first, I need to modify the last cannon backpack, so that it fits the autocannon backpack properly, as it is currently too long. To do this, I will need a sharp new blade on my scalpel. I use my scalpel to score into the side of the backpack. The ridges act as a handy reference for cutting a straight line through to the other side. I need to cut it across the centre point of the fan, so I take my time making sure that I get a straight cut, as there's likely no fixing it if it starts going wonky. After scoring a line all the way across the backpack, I attempt to remove the blade from the plastic so I can check that it's mostly level. I would say that the line is about even at this point, so the next step is to attempt to cut the rest of the way through the plastic. You could use a saw for this task, but to get a nice clean cut, I am using two things: a scalpel and power. I continue pressing down through the plastic with my scalpel until I've cut all the way through. And with nothing holding it in place, it seems that the backpack has now vanished from existence. After retrieving it from the depths of the warp, you can see that I've achieved a flat and even cut through to the other side. With this step complete, it now fits comfortably under the first backpack. There is just one final step left. I slice away the two small horns protruding from the top of the backpack. I need to do this step carefully, as I don't want to damage any of the detail on the wires. With the horns now whittled away, it's time to glue the two sections together. I pick up my bottle of Gorilla Glue and apply some onto the end of a cocktail stick. I carefully spread this into the centre cavity of the last cannon backpack, and then around the rim where the two backpacks will meet. Be careful not to get glue on your fingers at this point. Now I simply slot this into place on top of what was once an autocannon backpack to make the body of the main generator. Now that the main section is complete, I'm going to fill the hollow in the centre with green stuff. I again apply Gorilla Glue to a cocktail stick, and then spread it around evenly inside, so the green stuff sticks more effectively to the walls. I then mix up a small amount of green stuff and push it inside the hole. Picking up a cocktail stick, I press the green stuff into the gap, making sure it goes all the way to the back. I also make sure I push the green stuff into the sides where I applied the glue earlier, to make sure it always stays securely attached to the plastic. I then repeat these steps until the whole cavity is eventually mostly filled with green stuff. No need to fully smooth off the bottom of this, as you wouldn't be able to see it after it's been glued to a base anyway. I apply a small sausage of green stuff to the top of the plasticard rectangle and use a small amount of water and my clay shaper to flatten it out and smooth it over the area. In doing this, I achieve a much smoother transition between the top of the backpack and the plasticard, as you can see. Next, I use the same technique and spread the green stuff all the way over the edges, covering the sides of the plasticard and achieving a smooth finish. I keep pushing the green stuff with the clay shaper until it's nice and flat and covers the whole side. This may take a while to get perfectly smooth. Just make sure that you keep applying drops of water to keep the green stuff smooth and malleable as you're going along. With the back and side smoothed over with the fine layer of green stuff, there's just the other side left to do. I repeat this process on this side of the backpack, keeping the green stuff wet and carefully pushing the green stuff over the sides. At this point I realise there isn't enough green stuff to work with, so I simply mix up a tiny amount and apply it to the side that I'm working on. I use the clay shaper to blend the new green stuff in with the previous lot. I then continue to flatten it down until it's even with the other side. It's important to push the green stuff into all the edges to avoid any seams appearing. With the green stuff in place, it's important to wait for it to dry before moving on to the next task at hand, as not to undo the work I've already achieved. Now that the main section is complete, I am free to move on to the next section, the feet. I only need the stands from these lamps, so it's time to bring out the scalpel again. I use my scalpel to cut off the light bulb section of the lamps. I score a line from where the lamp sticks out, and then proceed to cut down from this point, until I'm left with just the stand section. Although this may look like a suitable foot already, it wouldn't currently stand upright, so I need to trim off this raised section underneath. This is a task best suited for the plastic snips. I rest the flat part of the snips against the plastic and simply use them to snip away the long raised area under the foot. It's hard to go wrong with this task, so I just keep going until all the raised plastic has been removed. This is actually quite a satisfying task to complete. I then use my scalpel to smooth off the surface so that it'll sit completely flat to the base. I just gradually scrape away at the top layers until I'm left with a smooth flat surface underneath. With this task complete, you can see that it no longer has a problem standing upright on its own. I snip away the last bits of excess plastic and repeat these steps on the other foot. Now let's move on to the whistles and bells, the control panel and the handle. I found this part in my bits box, and with some detective work, I figured out it's from an orc truck. This part will be attached to the front of the generator, but as you can see, it doesn't quite fit flush, so I need to first trim off some of this plastic from the front. I score into the top section of the fan with my scalpel to mark out where I need to cut down into. I just need to remove this section above the band, so I carefully slice down with my scalpel. As you can see, it's quite easy to slip whilst doing this, and slice straight through the plastic. Luckily, I can fix this mistake relatively easily by slicing further into the plastic and then repeating the same steps again, just a little more carefully this time. With this attempt somewhat more successful than the last, I place the control panel back over the modified area. As you can see, it now fits into place much better, with the band now slotting into the gap on the back of the console. Now that I know it fits, I apply some glue on the back of the control panel, at the point where it makes contact with the generator. I then press the control panel into place and make sure that I've properly centered it before the glue dries. This is an important step, as it will be a fairly central feature when the conversion is finished, so I need to get it right. With the control panel now securely attached to the generator, it is now time to attach the legs. To get the legs in the right position, I use my scalpel to mark it slightly off center, with the hole being slightly closer to the front. I put the foot in place over the hole to make sure I've marked out the correct location. I then do the same on the other side. With the correct location marked out, I drill into the scalpel hole with my pin vise. As I keep turning the pin vise, I notice that the plastic flash from the drill turns green as I drill into the green stuff layer inside. Next, I need to drill into the top of the legs. As before, I mark out the location with a scalpel and drill into said location. I need to drill all the way through the top of this part, so I take my time and make sure the hole is straight. With this now complete, I'll need to source some Pinion Material to attach it all together. As I'll need something good and strong for this task, I'll be using the ever-reliable paperclip. As before, I unfold it and insert it into the drill hole. I then cut the paperclip into a manageable size with my wire snips. With this done, I simply thread the leg that I drilled out earlier onto the pinning wire. In doing this, you can get a better idea of what the finished piece will look like. Although it doesn't seem too sturdy at the moment, that'll be easy to fix later on. For now, I just do the same on the other side, so that both feet are attached. As you can see, everything is just spinning about freely at the moment, so my next task will be to sort that problem out. I then apply some Gorilla Glue directly onto the pin and insert it into the drill hole in the side of the main generator. I make sure that the pin is fully inserted into the hole and that it's sitting straight before moving on to the next step. After checking that there's still glue on the pin, I simply slide the first leg in place onto the pinning material. As you can see, the legs are just the right length to elevate the main body off the base. I repeat these steps for the other side so that our conversion now has two legs attached. At this point, you can tell whether you've drilled the holes evenly. Luckily, both of the legs are at the same height. Be careful at this stage, as the pins are totally covered in glue. Now it's time to attach it to the base. Although after placing it onto the base, I notice that the feet are noticeably too long to fit properly. To solve this problem, I carefully trim off the excess plastic from the feet with a scalpel, trying my best to get a straight and even cut. I then place it back onto the base, making sure that it's centered, and check to see whether it fits. With the feet no longer protruding over the base, I can move on to the next step of the conversion, attaching the cables. I'm going to be using a custom-made green stuff cable for this step, so it needs a little tidying up. After cutting the end flat with a scalpel, I measure it to size under the main generator. I then score it at the point where I'll be trimming it down. With the cable flat to the cutting board, I slice it at the point I marked out. Now I have the correct size piece, I'll need to securely attach it to the model. I use my pin vise to drill into the center on both sides of the cable. I then apply some glue to the end of the pinning material and insert it into one of the drill holes. Picking up my wire snips, I trim down the excess pinning material. I can then apply glue to the leftover wire and use it as a pin for the other side. After snipping off any excess pinning material, the cable is now ready to attach. With pins on both sides of this relatively short piece of green stuff, it's hard not to get covered in glue at this point, as you can see. I cautiously apply a little more glue to the wire and then insert the cable into the drill hole at the bottom of the generator. As you can see, the cable fills out what was once just an empty space in the centre of the model. Although with this pin sticking out of the cable, the model will no longer sit on the base. To fix this, I just drill into the centre of the base with my pin vise. This indent conveniently marks out the centre spot. With the base now drilled out, I apply plenty of Gorilla Glue directly under both of the feet and on the pinning wire that's sticking out of the centre cable. There's no need to be too precise with the glue here. I then firmly stick the structure into position on top of the base. For once, I don't have to worry about getting it perfectly centre, as the pin will just do this job for me. With the main structure now assembled and on its base, I can now start to add in the extra cables to give it more shape and to bulk out the structure a little. These are the cables I'll be using for the conversion. I made all these with a tool called the Rollmaker. I bought mine on Green Stuff World, but there are plenty of similar ones about on eBay. I definitely recommend getting one if you do conversions often, as they're quite versatile. You can use it to make custom cables or tentacles in a wide variety of styles, shapes and sizes. If you don't have a Rollmaker handy, you could always use chunky bass or guitar strings for the job instead. To attach the first cable, I use my pin vise and drill into the side of the generator. I keep going until I've drilled all the way through the piece, and then I drill back into the other side to make sure the hole is even. I then add glue to some Pinion Material and insert it through the hole I just drilled out. I make sure that I push the wire through so that it's sticking out evenly on both sides of the plastic before the glue dries. Next, I choose one of the green stuff cables I rolled out previously. I check it next to the pin I'll be attaching it to, making sure I'm happy with the size of the cable at that particular location. As I rolled these cables myself out of green stuff, the ends of the wires have not formed properly, but the rest of the piece looks perfect. To fix this, I just use my plastic snips to cut off the ends of the cable so that they're even and they sit flat with the plastic. Even though the green stuff has dried, the cable is still quite malleable. This is quite useful, as I'll need to bend it a fair amount to get it to sit properly on the base. I tidy it up by snipping off the ends with my plastic snips. Then, as usual, I mark out the location with my scalpel and then use my pin vise to drill through the centre. Although as the cables are relatively thin, I need to take extra care not to drill through the sides and ruin the detail. I test out whether the cable fits snugly to the pin before I glue it on. Now that I know that it fits, I apply glue to the end of the pin and just slot on the cable. With it securely attached to the main body, I can now bend the cable around and start attaching it to the other end of the base. After bending it in place, I can see that it is currently far too long to fit, although this shouldn't be too tricky to fix. To sort out this issue, I just use my plastic snips and cut the cable so it will fit properly onto the base. To get it to sit flat to the base, I'll need to cut it at an angle. As you can see, when I place the angled cable onto the base, it now sits flush. To attach it to the base proper, I drill into the cable, apply glue to a pin, and insert the pin into the drill hole. Now I just need to attach the pin to the base. To do this, I use the usual steps. I figure out where I want to drill, using my scalpel to mark out the base. Then I drill through the base at the marked location, although this time I'll need to drill at a slight angle. Finally, I apply some glue to the Pinion Material and insert it into the drill hole on the base. As you can see, this looks quite impressive. With the first cable now attached, I simply repeat this method for the other points on the main structure until all of the cables are attached. As I glue on the final cable, you can see that it's really starting to take shape. You could keep going and add more cables if you like, but I decided not to overcrowd the structure too much this time. On to the finishing touches. I noticed that I really need to add something to cover the hole in the control panel. After rooting through my bits box, I find this, a part of a winch from an Orc truck. If I can snip it down a little, it should make a good handle. To do this, I just use my plastic snips and snip off the handle part from the rest of the mechanism. To attach it, I place a small amount of glue into the hole with a cocktail stick. I then apply a little more glue direct to the back of the handle, and then just slot it into the hole in the centre of the control panel. Finally, I simply swipe off any excess glue with a cocktail stick. With the main body now complete, I just need to add the ring section to make it into a Noctilith crown. Luckily, I've already prepared the pin and the drill hole at the beginning of the conversion, so all that this step entails is simply applying glue onto the pin and slotting the ring onto the generator. I make sure I push the pin into the drill hole so that the ring is firmly attached to the rest of the model. Then, I make sure that I angle the ring so that the spikes are all pointing in the correct direction. I don't want the Chaos Star to look off centre at all. I rotate it around and check it from all directions, making sure that there is nothing I've missed out. Once I'm sure that I've adjusted the angle correctly and that the piece is firmly glued together, I can then finally step back and appreciate the conversion in its entirety. Rotating it all the way around, you can get a better look at all of the wires attached to the back. I think this gives a fairly satisfying effect, even at the rear of the model. I'd say that looking good from any angle is an important factor in creating an objective marker, as they are often a centerpiece on the battlefield. With the model finally complete, The only thing left to do is to base it and paint it up so it's ready for the battlefield. So I'm going to quickly run down the basics of basing. To attach the sand, I simply apply glue to the base. I spread the glue into all of the awkward corners with a cocktail stick, being careful not to get any on the main model itself or on the side of the base. I take one pinch of sand at a time and carefully sprinkle it all around the base, making sure I rotate it around to achieve an even coating of basing material. I continue on with this method until I'm happy with the coverage over the whole base, adding in more glue and sand to any parts that I've missed out. It's important to get this step correct, as it wouldn't look right if there was a bare spot of flat earth amidst all the rubble. I keep sprinkling on the sand mix over the base, covering up all the spots of glue. As I'm doing this, I also knock off any loose sand that gets stuck to the plastic parts with a new cocktail stick, not the one I was using for the glue, as that would be counterproductive. When I'm happy with the level of sand coverage, I can then take my time to look at the model as a whole. I think that adding sand to the base has really tied the piece together, as well as giving the effect of the wires being firmly anchored into the ground. Though the whole process was somewhat time consuming, I think the results of the conversion shows that the extra effort was worth it. As well as this, there are only a handful of parts required to actually make this conversion. So providing your local bit store has the items in stock, this should be a relatively cheap model to make. And in the end, you've created an undeniably unique and interesting addition to any battlefield. And with these cute and portable versions of your standard nightmare generator, I'm sure that your favourite chaos cult can cause all sorts of mischief throughout the galaxy of the 41st millennium. Finally, we can see the glorious Noctilith crown fully painted. As it'll act as an objective marker, I wanted to paint it in a fairly bright scheme so it'd stand out on most battlefields. For this, I used a mixture of Citadel Technical, Contrast, Metallics and plain layer paints. I generally prefer to use Citadel colours as I like the variety, although admittedly the pots are just a bit rubbish. I tested out a new chrome effect out on the spikes. This didn't turn out quite as planned, as it was my first time working with the stuff. But I have since tried it out on other models, and it definitely produces an interesting effect. If you're interested in how I painted this conversion, leave a comment and I might just buy a full-size Noctilith crown for a painting guide. If you're wondering about the base, I've used a 50mm for this conversion. I feel that making an objective marker on anything smaller would be a little bit too cramped. It seems that the 9th edition rules recommend using a 40mm base for objective markers, but seeing as Games Workshop's own Indomitus markers are all on 50mm bases, I'm sure this is still perfectly acceptable. As for purchasing all the parts of this conversion, well, most things are cheap and plentiful, such as the backpacks and the old truck bits. I wish you luck when it comes to finding the Cities of Death parts and the Chaos Warshrine parts, as the Cities of Death lamps are technically out of production, and the closest I've spotted to them is a very similar lamp on eBay, which should actually do the job. The ring from the Warshrine kit doesn't seem to be on any bit sites at the moment, as the kit is fairly new. There was one on eBay, but I obviously bought that one. With any luck, in time they'll become a bit more available. We are Warpsong Games. If you enjoyed this video, then why not like, subscribe and share. Don't forget to leave a comment if you'd like to see more objective markers, or if you have an idea for something you'd like to see in our upcoming videos. And if you're interested in checking out any of our previous videos, then click on one of the links above.